Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of SketchyGOichie. I'm your humble host, Roger Andrews, illustrator, graphic designer, and you know what I do. Anyways, jumping right in, this is for those who are uninitiated, it is an avatar piece, Navi. The female Navi, I don't recall her name. I should probably seen the movie like half a dozen times. It escapes me now, and I'm sure at some point mid-video it will lock right in and I'll be like, oh, what's her name. All right, but anyways, what's important here is the drawing, and in this particular episode I'm going to focus in on technique. If you notice, as I've zoomed in a little bit here, I am working off of a piece of reference. I have, as I have in previous pop culture icon sketches, I have sort of photoshopped a couple of different photos together to make this work. You'll see those little wisps over her shoulder there, above her ear. Those are the little sort of, I don't even know what you really call them, sort of the energy. Those little, they exist in our world. They're these little wispy things that they're like seeds, I think, and they sort of, they catch the wind and then they fly around. But I've spent way too much time on that. So let me spend more time on the art. It is drawn in Procreate. I am using, in this case, I believe I'm using the technical pencil. I generally use a technical pen, and both of the brushes are actually, one's in the ink set, obviously the pen, and the pencil is in, I think, the graphite or the pencil set, whatever it's called in Procreate. You can see I've got a ton of information for this one. And I'm just doing what I'd like to call artful tracing. And it's a way that I've found is tremendous for capturing the realistic shapes. Here's the thing though, you have to kind of have a lot of practice in working from real life. Like I spent a lot of time in art school and a lot of time since drawing real people, and so I've got kind of a sense on what eyelids should look like, and in this case here what lips should look like, and generally I have a general sense of the shape of the head and all that good stuff. So I highly recommend you do the same. But if you're learning and you really want to capture something as close to perfect a likeness as possible, I like to work off of a photo reference. A, it's fast, and B, it's kind of what real illustrators do and have done for probably a century. Our means of finding reference in order to make this happen is much easier than your Norman Rockwells of the world, who probably had to do a practical photo shoot in order to basically make a piece of art look like what you want to render. So, anyways, getting back to the art. Speaking of art, here I take away the underlining photograph just for a second there, so you can I do that periodically just to kind of see where I stand in terms of the line art and the line quality, because obviously unless I really made the opacity of the layer that the photograph resides on really low, you can kind of see it through, and the line is a little difficult to see on the layer above. Black line over black hair is very difficult to see unless you've got the opacity way down on that photo layer. So essentially this is just it's a two-layer piece of art in Procreate. And again, back into technique. Technique is, again, it's a pencil sketching. It's the same thing you would do if you were working on paper. As a matter of fact, when I use, obviously I'm on the iPad, I use a matte finish screen protector. You can find them on Amazon. And when I do, it sort of, it gives me the illusion that I'm working on paper, because there's just a subtle bit of tooth, a subtle bit of texture that the Apple Pencil can kind of drag on, and it kind of mimics the effect of working on paper. But then in terms of the actual lines themselves, it really is I like to taper lines. I like to have a thick line. Some people prefer a more technical line, which is essentially a mono line, which is essentially one single consistent line weight. I like the thick and thin. I like to kind of replicate what a brush would do if I were inking it. Obviously, the more pressure you apply, the thicker the line, and as you release the pressure on any given stroke, it basically makes that line a bit smaller and smaller and smaller until it's nothing when you release the brush from the surface, or in this case the Apple Pencil from the surface. So as you can see here, I'm sort of just feathering in the hair, because even you can kind of tell based off the photograph there's not a ton of detail, but I do know that those are braids, a long series of braids coming out of her scalp. So what I've indicated right along the top of her forehead is where the hair would come from the top of the scalp down along the back of the head. And so technique-wise, all I'm doing here is just capturing the darkest shapes and then tapering them, as I just tried to indicate. And so that way I don't necessarily have to render each and every individual braid. It's kind of a trick. It's basically, if you find the darkest shape and taper it towards the light, you give the impression that I've illustrated every single braid. When in reality, all I've done is illustrated the darkest shapes, the shadow shapes that are the braids. And then because I feathered them off, darkest to light, meaning thickest part of the stroke to its point, it kind of tricks your eye into thinking it has volume. It tricks your eye into thinking it actually a shape kind of bends around itself and towards the light, the darkest shape going back into shadow. And so that's what I'm doing here, and it's a series of shapes. And as long as, and this is a tricky thing to learn, as long as you follow the light, meaning the ends of those strokes should end towards the light. And if you keep that direction fairly consistent, yet however inconsistent for hair, because the more consistency you apply to hair, the more sort of like sterile and robotic it looks, the less organic. So there has to be some irregular shapes here and there to give the viewer the impression that it's organic. Let's think about it. If you're rendering any animal or human with fur or hair, it's never perfectly straight and in a line. You never want to have any kind of compass or straight edge feel to any hair or anything that is furry or things like that. You want it to be sort of inconsistent and taper off to a point. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. This area where the light sort of gets in behind the edge of the braid, and in order to capture that, it's almost like you have to leave the paper surface showing. Meaning, I watch, again, I've mentioned in other videos, I watch tattoo shows, and they talk about a thing called skin breaks, where you don't apply ink in certain areas where the light is, thus allowing the skin to show through underneath. So the skin becomes the white or the lightest part of whatever piece of art. And if you leave enough of that, it allows it to breathe. All right, so you can see here where I take away the and bring it back, of course. I take away the photograph. You can kind of see there's air space, I'll call it, in between the sets of braids, which kind of gives you the illusion that light is catching them, and the light gets less intense as you get away from the light source. So the light source clearly here is probably two places. It's one above her head, off to the left, and there's obviously the source that's reflecting along the side of her, the right side of her forehead down to her to the top of her eyelid or eyebrow, and then along her nose and along the right side of her face. So there's two light sources. So light can be caught on both edges, and then there should be less light away from them. And that's what will give you even in line art, that's what will give you the impression of depth. You can see here where it's darkest where the feathers are below her ears, because there wouldn't be any light in there. But however, there's little hints of white in there. I don't know if you notice it, right between where the bottom of the feathers are and where the necklace is that's heading down towards her chest. That you notice there's little hits of white in there. There's probably little areas that kind of jet out a bit and that catch a little bit of light, and that's what kind of, again, gives you the illusion that it's set back. Again, a lot of this stuff is just practice. in effect, I just basically, you know, because I'm working from reference, it's really easy to see where those little darkish, shadowy areas are and where they're not. But you have to have kind of put your time in, drawing from a ton, either drawing from a ton of photos or drawing from life, to be able to capture that with some comfort. All right, so here I've applied a new layer. So we're moving on to a next phase. I'm actually heading towards the final phase. I added a new layer on top because I wanted to add those sort of stripes, those sort of feline-like stripes that are on the Navi. And her name still hasn't caught up with me, so please put her name in the comments so I can remember. And also, don't forget to go to the Facebook group. I've got a SketchyGOichie Facebook group. And as you can see here, because it's on a new layer, I was able to lower the opacity of that, those black streaks, those sort of cat-like stripes in her face. And then now I'm applying a background. I still have that photo with the those wispy things, whatever those are. Those, you know, I know it's the tree of life that came from the tree of life and all that stuff in the movie. Everybody's seen Avatar, so you know what I'm talking about. So I rendered one of them, and then I added a layer on top with a little subtle bit of like airbrushed white, and then I lowered the opacity on that. So essentially, those little wisps, the one just above her on the left side of her ear, I did one of them, and then I duplicated them several times. You can kind of see them in the background, and I knocked off the opacity, and then I was done. Anyways, SketchyGOichie, guys. Live your moment. Happy sketching, y'all. Peace.